So, good day, and welcome back to this week's episode of my podcast. I have to figure out a name for this or something. Hey, just before we get going too far, just a couple of housekeeping things here. Thank you for those of you that pointed out that the website was not behaving properly when you accessed it from mobile devices, phones, tablets. And I have most of that fixed, I believe. I'm still working to get the blog page the way I want it. I do have kind of a workaround. So if you try to access the page that has the three current blogs on it, and it on your phone or a tablet, and it doesn't look quite right, it doesn't behave properly, try again in about 20 minutes. I'm working with the developers to try to figure out what's going on there, but I don't want to leave it broken for very long. So I'll give them some windows to work on that, but just a heads up on that. Also, if you would go to the website here, and on the bottom of the home page, register for the newsletter, so that, like yesterday when I was unable to get this podcast published, I could have just sent out an email real quick and just said, hey, just heads up, it didn't happen. I also, if I have people's emails, I can actually send you an email when I do post, and then you don't have to go looking for to see if one's been posted. So those two things, I appreciate it. Also, go to both Facebook and YouTube. The links are on the website, and like the posts that come up, and also follow my podcast on Facebook and on YouTube, so we can start building some momentum on that. All right, great, thank you so much. Well, anyway, the topic that we're talking about today, it kind of hit me a couple months ago. I was reading an article, and it was like, wow. As we know, there is a lot going on in the Mideast with Israel, with the Gaza Strip, with Hezbollah, with all of that stuff that's going on in that region. And I read an article that basically stated there had been 5 different opportunities for the two-state solution to come into effect, and none of them obviously have. We still don't have 2 states, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's your choice. But I thought, wow, I'd like to talk about that, and so I started reading, started doing research, and as I was preparing for this week's podcast, it dawned on me that, man, there's a lot of stuff here. And so I'm going to do kind of some groundwork today, and then next week I will talk about the kind of some follow-up to it. All right? And I was just going to say up front, I'm not an expert on the Mideast by any means. A lot of people have written, a lot of people have studied, a lot of people have a whole lot more knowledge than I do. But I'm just going to point out what I that was brought to me and to my attention, and so we're going to go from there. All right? So if we approach the beginning, in the book of Genesis, in the Bible, I use the Bible a lot in my life, and if you're not a follower of the Bible, that's fine. But in Genesis, which is the very first book of the Christian Bible, also of the Torah, in chapter 14, we see the description of a military encounter between 4 kings from outside of the region, coming as in an alliance against 5 kings that lived in the area of Israel, what we call Israel today. They believe they lived in the area of the Dead Sea, what we call the Dead Sea now. And I'm not going to go into the all the details of what happened and why and whatever. my point being that very early on in the history, biblical history, there was conflict in the region, conflict that seems to have just continued for generations, centuries even. So we have Genesis 14, and then Abraham and his family end up in Egypt for about 430 years. And during that 430 years, Abraham's family grows to several million people. So when Moses leads the Jews out of Egypt after 430 years there were a lot more than there were when they came in. And they were headed back to the promised land, the land that Abraham had settled, that he had been told by God that his descendants would own that land. And so they went back to take it over. And along the way, yes, they encountered some resistance. There were some battles. And when they went into the land, they destroyed cities, and some of them they completely destroyed. They destroyed every human being. They destroyed every herd, every flock. They burned the buildings to the ground. In particular, at the beginning of their conquest, and towards the end, they weren't quite so disciplined, will I say, that because they I think they just wanted to get on with life. Not sure why, but anyway, they intermarried with the local people, which their God had told them not to do, but they did it anyway. And so there were a lot of people in that region. So after the Jews had taken over the area, they took it over by tribe. There were 12 tribes that made up the Jewish people. The bigger tribes got more land. The smaller tribes got smaller portions. But this is a map showing what it looked like when after the Jews had taken over the land. And so what this map does not show is the nations around, the kingdoms around that at various times brought hostilities against Israel, or Israel caused some problem or whatever. But again, the issue, well, and the Philistines, which we talked about a minute ago, or no, we didn't. The Philistines, I meant to bring that up when we were talking about Egypt, that the word Palestine that we hear today has been traced back to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians used the word Palestine to refer to the Philistines, which were a people that came across the Mediterranean Sea and set up some inhabited kind of the area that's now known as the Gaza Strip. And the Philistines lived there, fought against Israel at various times in their dual existence, and then that people somewhat disappeared. But the word Palestine, or Palestine, I mean, came from way back in the days of Egypt, and so I just wanted to put that out there. But the Philistines lived down in the area that's now inhabited, or is the area of the Gaza Strip. So if we then go to a little further, at one point after King Solomon died, there grew a division in amongst the people, amongst those people that were in positions of leadership. And so we ended up actually with two kingdoms. And we had the kingdom of Israel, which were made up of 10 of the tribes, and the kingdom of Judah, which was made up of the other two tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And in this map, you do see the other kingdoms that were around. Here's the Philistines over here, the kingdom of Moab, the kingdom of Ammon. So these were all peoples that if you read in particular First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, you see some of these kingdoms, the kings mentioned, and the hostilities that between either the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, or both of them, and these various kingdoms. So we have this dual kingdom, and eventually that goes away. The Assyrians come in, and take over the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom. They destroy the cities. They exile the people. And they actually tried to attack the southern kingdom and take over Jerusalem. Excuse me. But they weren't able to do that. In the meantime, the Babylonians and King Nebuchadnezzar come on the scene. They defeat the Assyrians, and then Nebuchadnezzar's army does take over Jerusalem, takes the people into exile, leaves a few of them on the land. Again, though, the point being this conflict, this constant conflict that goes on in this region. It wasn't like they necessarily were after just that particular piece of geography, but they took it as when they assumed the ownership of the kingdom that had been defeated. So then a Persian king named King Cyrus comes in. He defeats the Babylonians. He allows the people under his rule to live more of the life that they would like. So he allows some of the Jews to begin to return to the land. They rebuild the city of Jerusalem. They rebuild their temple, and that lasts for a time. For about 200 years, the Persians ruled, and life wasn't too bad. And then Alexander the Great, he was Greek, came in, defeated the Persians, and set up his way of doing things, imposed his culture on that area, and then when he passed away, his empire was left to his sons. One of the sons who had control of Egypt, and another one of his sons who had control of Syria. They both wanted the land in between, which is Israel, and part of what is now Jordan. And so for about 125 years, these two kingdoms were fighting over that piece of land, on that land. So the battles would occur in that area. Once again, more conflict, more bloodshed, more battles, all on this land. And eventually, the kingdom of Syria defeated the kingdom of Israel and took over that land. But they only held it for about 50 years before the Jews actually revolted, and they defeated Syria. In that time, they enjoyed about 60 years of independent rule, where the Jews got to take care of themselves. It was in this time, in this 60-year period, that this region first began to be called Judea or Judea, and that kind of stuck with it as it went forward. In the year 63 BC, Rome comes on the scene, and they take control of it. There are skirmishes. There is a lot of stress between the Romans and the Jews, and that doesn't necessarily go very well. And we read about some of those instances if you read the first four books of the Christian New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see some of that in there. Now, it's kind of interesting because as Christians, we after Jesus is crucified, we kind of start to follow Paul and the other apostles as they're off advancing the church. And very few people actually continue to think about, I wonder what happened to the Jews and to the Romans. Because about 30 years after Jesus was crucified, there was a revolt, and it's referred to by the Jews as the Great Revolt. It lasted about 3 years, and eventually the Romans sent an army of about 60,000 professional soldiers, not their normal draftees, but these were some of their best troops. They sent them to crush this revolt. And after they crushed the revolt, the Romans took away a lot of the privileges that the Jews had enjoyed. They could no longer study the Torah, which is their holy book. They could no longer build or meet in synagogues. They could not offer sacrifices. They a lot of their day-to-day parts of their faith were not allowed. And actually, this just kind of continued to escalate because about 60 years later, there was a second revolt in the year 132, and that revolt also lasted about 3 years. And when that one was done, you between the two revolts, you had about 1 million Jews that had been killed. They had lost control of their land. After the second revolt, any of the remaining Jews were either enslaved, exiled, or enslaved and exiled. And that was kind of interesting because at that point, the Jews had no place. So as we go on in history, the Jews had nowhere to go because now they had no land, they had no place to go, and so if they were to flee persecutions, they had nowhere to flee to. Another very, very, very important aspect is that after that second revolt, the Romans, instead of calling this area of the world Judea, they called it Palestine. They knew the animosity between the Philistines and the Jews, and so they took that word, that Egyptian word of Palestine, and they used it purposely as a way to separate this land from the Jews. So that was when the land was first called Palestine, was after the Romans crushed the revolt in 135. And after the Romans, they hung around for a little bit longer, but then came the Byzantine Empire, and that was greatly influenced by the Christian church, and we see a lot of early things in the early Christian church that happened during this rule from the Byzantine Empire. Then after about 300 years, the Persians come back again, a different Persian empire, once again invaded the region, took over and controlled it for a short 12 years. Then the Muslims came in and defeated the army, took control of it, and ruled it for about 450 years, a long time. The Muslims were in control of, basically what had been some of the Christian holy sites. They destroyed some of the early churches and things, and so eventually the European church. The Europeans got upset enough that they sent their soldiers, the Crusades, the Knights, and they defeated the Muslims. And there was, then there were battles back and forth for almost 200 years that the Crusaders fought different crusades against the Muslims in that part of the world. Then eventually there was a group of Muslims that came to power, and they ruled over Judea for about 225 years after they defeated the Crusaders. Then one last group, the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire was a huge empire that's covered all the way up to like Turkey and Greece, and came down through Iraq and Syria, and the Mediterranean coast, all the way over to the North African coast. But they ruled from about 1517 to 1917. 400 years the Ottomans ruled that part of the world, and just a lot that could be said. So you have a couple of these very long periods when different groups, the Muslims, once they defeated the Persians and after the Byzantine era, they ruled for about 450 years, and then the Ottomans ruled for 400 years as well. And so, again, my purpose in quickly running through all of this was just to emphasize that this part of the world has been historically in turmoil. Yes, there's been these periods of where one entity has ruled for 450 years. That does not mean that there wasn't conflict during those 450 years. It just means that whatever conflict, it did not overtake the ruling group. So next week we're going to talk about things, a little more recent history from 1917 coming forward a little ways, but just again, I don't have an answer, and I'm just trying to share some of this information, allow people to think a little bit more clearly, instead of just saying, oh well, this is how to solve that problem. It's not that easy, and it's not a simple thing, obviously. So anyway, y'all have a great week, and may you be blessed, and leave me some comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about my podcast. Have a great day. Bye-bye.